I had given that woman 7 years of my life, my career, my savings, my sleep, my silence. And I was standing in a hospital corridor in my coat from the night before when the doctor put his hand on my shoulder, looked me directly in the eye, and said 4 words that turned every single one of those years into a question I didn't know how to answer. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. My name is ZAHA James Cartwright, and I'm 68 years. I was born in Nashville, raised in a small house on Elm Creek Road in Clover Falls, a town of about 14,000 people sitting in the eastern edge of Williamson County, the kind of town that still has a hardware store on Main Street and where the high school football coach has been the same man for 22 years. My father worked at the paper mill. My mother taught 4th grade at Clover Falls Elementary for 30 years. We were church people, Sunday dinner people, front porch people, the kind of family where you didn't leave when things got hard because leaving was simply not a category of available action. I became a contractor, built things, houses, additions, the occasional commercial project for clients in Franklin or Brentwood who had heard my name from someone reliable. I was good at it, not flashy good, but solid good, the kind of good that means your phone rings because someone's cousin had you pour their foundation 6 years ago, and it still hasn't shifted. I had 12 employees at my peak, a reputation I had spent 15 years constructing as carefully as any building I ever put up. I was 43 years old and largely content, not ecstatic, not restless, just the steady, grounded contentment of a man who knows what he is and is at peace with it. When I met Laura and Mercer. She was 40 at the time, recently relocated to Clover Falls from Memphis after a divorce she described, in the early weeks of our friendship, as quietly devastating. The kind of marriage that doesn't end in fire, but in a long, slow withdrawal of warmth until both people are simply standing in the same cold house pretending it's not cold. She had no children. She worked remotely as a medical billing specialist, irony that I would not appreciate until much later. And she had rented the small yellow house on Sycamore Lane, 3 blocks from the hardware store, with a directness that suggested a woman who had decided, after years of accommodation, to simply do what she wanted. She was not the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She was something better than that. She was the most present woman I had ever encountered. When Laura looked at you, really looked at you, she looked at you with her entire face, as though you were the most interesting thing in her immediate environment, and she had nowhere else she'd rather direct her attention. She laughed at things that were genuinely funny rather than things that were supposed to be funny. She had opinions she had actually thought about. She made the best chicken and dumplings I have ever eaten in my life, including my mother's, which I say with appropriate guilt. We dated for 14 months. She met my parents on a Sunday dinner in October, and my mother, who was not a woman who offered approval casually or early, pulled me into the kitchen after dessert and said, "Daniel, that woman is good. You hold on to her." I held on to her. We married on a Saturday in June at the Clover Falls Baptist Church, in a ceremony attended by 112 people, with my father as my best man because there was simply no other candidate I could justify. Laura wore ivory. She cried at the altar, not the self-conscious, decorative tears of a woman performing emotion, but the real kind, the kind that surprised her, that she pressed her fingers against as if she could hold them in. I thought, this woman is going to be the rest of my life. I was right about that. I just didn't understand yet what the rest of my life was going to mean. The first episode happened 14 months after the wedding. We had been out to dinner at Caldwell's on Main, the kind of Friday night that is perfect in its ordinariness, easy conversation, shared dessert, the familiar comfort of a couple who have learned each other's rhythms. We drove home. She went upstairs to change. Then she called my name in a way that brought me up the stairs 3 at a time. She was on the bathroom floor. Pale. Not gradually pale, but suddenly pale, the color draining from her face the way color drains from something when the source of it is cut off. Her hands were shaking. She said she couldn't feel her legs properly. Said the room was tilting. I called 911. At Clover Falls Regional, they ran tests, blood work, neurological screening, the standard battery. The attending physician, a tired but thorough man named Dr. Okafor, Came out to talk to me at 1 a.m. with the expression doctors wear when they have information but not yet answers. Her symptoms are consistent with several possible conditions, he said. We're going to need more tests. More time. But Mr. Cartwright, your wife has been unwell for longer than tonight. Some of these markers suggest a chronic process. What kind of chronic process? I asked. That's what we need to determine, he said. But I want you to be prepared. This may be a long road. A long road. I have since turned those 3 words over in my mind more times than I can count, examining them from every angle, wondering whether Dr. Okafor, who was a good and careful doctor, could have possibly understood how precisely, how almost surgically accurate his prediction was. 7 years. That is how long the road was. I want to tell you what those 7 years looked like, because I think people use the word caregiver without fully reckoning with what it contains. The word sounds noble in the abstract, and it is noble, genuinely. I am not recanting that, but in the particular, in the daily, in the 3 a.m. and the canceled jobs and the rescheduled everything, it is something that reshapes you so completely that you sometimes catch yourself in a mirror and don't immediately recognize the man looking back. Laura's condition, which cycled through diagnoses the way a wheel cycles through positions, each one feeling definitive until it didn't, manifested in episodes of severe weakness, neurological symptoms, gastrointestinal distress, and what her various doctors described as systemic dysfunction. Between episodes, she had good periods, sometimes weeks, occasionally a month or 2, where she was recognizably herself, the laughing present woman I had married, the chicken and dumplings, the full-face attention. During those periods, I would allow myself to believe, with the renewable hope of a man who needs to believe it, that we had turned a corner. Then another episode would come. I reduced my business in the 2nd year. Let 4 employees go. Good people. People who had been with me for years. People I had to look in the eye and explain that things had changed. Cut the commercial projects. Kept only the local work I could manage around her schedule, around the doctor's appointments, around the days when she couldn't be left alone. By the 4th year, I had effectively stopped working. My savings, which I had built carefully over 15 years of calloused hands and early mornings, began to move in one direction. Medical bills, even with insurance, and the insurance was a battle of its own, accumulated with the steady, indifferent persistence of water finding cracks. I sold the truck I'd had since 2009. I refinanced the house. I stopped going to the men's Bible study on Thursday nights because I was too tired and because the questions people asked, "How are you doing, Daniel? You hanging in there?" required an answer I didn't have the energy to give honestly. My mother called every Sunday. She said, "You're a good man, Daniel James." I said, "I'm just doing what you do." She said, "That's what makes you a good man." I should tell you about the doctors. There were 7 of them over the course of those years. Internists, neurologists, a rheumatologist in Nashville, a specialist at Vanderbilt who had a 3-month waiting list. They were, without exception, diligent and genuinely concerned. They ran tests. They ordered imaging. They consulted with each other via referrals and case notes. They each arrived at working diagnoses that explained some of Laura's symptoms and not others, and they each adjusted their approach when the treatments produced incomplete results. None of them, not one, in 7 years, said anything to me other than, "Your wife is very ill, Mr. Cartwright. You're doing the right thing." I believed them. I had no reason not to believe them. Laura was, in the hospital rooms and examination offices, a model patient, cooperative, articulate, thorough in her description of symptoms. She kept a journal of episodes that she brought to appointments, detailed and organized in a way that impressed every physician who saw it. She cried sometimes, in the offices, at the weight of it, and I would take her hand, and she would look at me with those present, full-face eyes and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Daniel." And I would say, "You're never going to have to find out." The crisis that put us in Clover Falls Regional for the last time, the crisis that put me in that corridor in my coat from the night before, began on a Wednesday. She woke at 2 a.m. with what she described as the worst episode yet. The symptoms were severe enough that I didn't hesitate, called 911 immediately, rode in the ambulance, sat in the waiting room while they stabilized her, spoke to the night resident, drank the worst coffee available to humanity from a machine in the hallway, and waited. At 7:15 a.m., a doctor I had not seen before came to find me. He was a compact, careful man in his mid-40s. Salt and pepper hair. The kind of eyes that have seen enough to stop being surprised by most things, but had not, apparently, stopped being troubled by them. His name badge said Dr. Stephen Hale, MD, Internal Medicine. He sat down in the chair beside mine in the corridor. He did not open with pleasantries. He said, "Mr. Cartwright, how long has your wife been ill?" 7 years, I said. "Give or take?" He nodded slowly, looked at his hands briefly, then looked back at me with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is now on the other side of it. The expression of someone who has chosen honesty over comfort and is about to demonstrate what that costs. He said, "Mr. Cartwright, I need you to call the police." The corridor went very quiet. I looked at him. He held my gaze without flinching. "I'm sorry," I said, because those were the only words that existed in that moment. The words you say when language has temporarily failed to produce anything more specific. What did you? "I need you to call the police," he said again. "And I need to explain to you why. But I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear." I looked at this man, this stranger in a white coat in a hospital corridor in Clover Falls, Tennessee, and something in the architecture of my chest shifted. Not broke. Not yet. Shifted. Like a foundation that has detected a change in the ground beneath it and is making the first, infinitesimal adjustments. "Tell me," I said. And he did. "I need to stop here and ask you something. If you are still reading, if this story has its hand around your heart right now, drop a comment. Just tell me, do you think you could survive what Daniel is about to hear? Comment below. And then keep reading, because this story is only beginning." Dr. Stephen Hale did not speak immediately. He sat with his hands clasped between his knees in the plastic chair beside mine in that hospital corridor, and he took a breath that was not the breath of a man gathering courage. He had already gathered his courage before he sat down. I could see that, but the breath of a man ensuring precision. Ensuring that what he was about to say landed exactly as he intended it to, with no room for misinterpretation, no softening that could later be mistaken for ambiguity. The corridor was its particular early morning self. A nurse moved past with a cart. Somewhere down the hall a monitor beeped in its steady, indifferent rhythm. The fluorescent light above us hummed at a frequency that I had never noticed before and would never stop noticing again. Dr. Hale said, "When was the last time your wife had a full workup done by a physician who had no prior relationship with her case?" I thought about it. Vanderbilt. 2021. Dr. Patricia Sung. And what was Dr. Sung's conclusion? "Inconclusive," I said. She said Laura's presentation was atypical and recommended ongoing monitoring. He nodded, unsurprised. "Mr. Cartwright, I came on shift at 6 a.m. this morning and reviewed your wife's chart. Her full chart, going back to her first admission here 7 years ago. I also reviewed the blood work we ran last night." He paused. "And then I reviewed it again, because I wanted to be certain before I said anything to you." "Certain about what?" I asked. He looked at me directly. "Your wife's symptoms," he said, "are consistent with a pattern that we in medicine have a name for. It is not a diagnosis we arrive at quickly or lightly, because the implications are serious, legally, criminally, and personally. The pattern is called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, or, in more current clinical language, factitious disorder imposed on another." The words entered my ears, traveled to whatever part of the brain processes language, and stopped there. Did not proceed further. Did not connect to meaning. I said. And then I stopped, because I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "Let me explain what that means," Dr. Hale said, with a gentleness that did not soften the content of what he was saying, only acknowledged that I was a human being receiving it. Factitious disorder imposed on another is a condition in which a person, usually a caregiver, but not exclusively, deliberately induces or fabricates illness in another person in order to receive attention, sympathy, or some other psychological or material benefit. He paused. "In your wife's case," he said carefully, "the evidence suggests that she has not been the caregiver. She has been the patient. She has been inducing illness in herself." I heard the words. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I heard them. They were clear. Dr. Hale was a careful, articulate man, and he had chosen each word with deliberate precision, and there was nothing unclear about the sentence he had constructed. And yet my brain, with the stubborn loyalty of an organ that has spent 7 years organizing an entire life around a particular reality, Did what brains do when confronted with information that would require the demolition of that reality. It looked for an exit. That's not possible, I said. I understand that's your first response, Dr. Hale said. It would be anyone's. She's been sick for 7 years. 7 doctors. Vanderbilt. I have spent. I stopped. Started again. She was on the bathroom floor. She couldn't feel her legs. Yes, he said. There are several substances, some of them available without prescription, some requiring minimal access, that can produce exactly those symptoms when administered in carefully controlled amounts. Weakness, neurological disruption, gastrointestinal distress, systemic presentation that mimics a range of conditions. He paused. The reason this pattern is so difficult to detect is that the symptoms are real. The suffering is real. The body is genuinely responding to a genuine substance. What is fabricated is the cause. The corridor hummed. The monitor down the hall continued its indifferent rhythm. I looked at my hands in my lap, my contractor's hands, with the small scar on the left index finger from a table saw in 2014, with the calluses that had softened over 4 years of not working, and I tried to locate something solid. What substance? I asked. My voice sounded like it was coming from further away than my body. We found elevated levels of ipecac derivatives and a compound consistent with heavy metal microdosing in her blood work last night, he said. Both can be self-administered. Both produce a symptom profile that, presented intermittently and with sufficient variation, is extraordinarily difficult to attribute to a single cause, especially when the patient is cooperative, medically literate, and maintains detailed symptom documentation. The symptom journal. The detailed, organized, impressive symptom journal that every physician had praised. I looked at the wall across the corridor. It was painted the particular institutional beige of hospital walls everywhere, a color chosen, I had always assumed, for its neutrality, its inoffensiveness, its capacity to be background. I stared at it, and I thought about Laura on the bathroom floor in the ivory dress. I thought about the nights I had sat beside her hospital bed. I thought about my 12 employees. I thought about the truck I sold, the savings account, the refinanced house, the Thursday night Bible study I stopped attending because I was too tired. I thought about her face at the altar, the real tears. I don't know what I'd do without you, Daniel. Why? I said. It was the only question, the only one that mattered, the only word that existed. Dr. Hale was quiet for a moment. That, he said gently, is a question for a psychiatrist, a detective, and ultimately for your wife. What I can tell you is that the pattern is consistent with someone who has a profound psychological need for the role of patient, for the attention, the care, the centrality that serious illness provides. In some cases, there are also financial motivations. Insurance, disability, dependency structures that. He stopped. Watch my face. Mr. Cartwright, he said quietly. Did your wife receive any financial benefit from her illness? Insurance payments, disability income, anything of that nature? And there it was. The thing beneath the thing. The second floor of a building I had only been examining the first floor of. I sat very still, and I thought about the insurance claims. Laura had handled them from the beginning, which had seemed natural, given her background in medical billing, given that she understood the system in ways I never had and never tried to. She had managed every claim, every submission, every appeal, every reimbursement check that arrived at our address on Maple Creek Drive. She had kept the files organized in a cabinet in the spare bedroom that I had never had reason to open because she had always said, with the pleasant efficiency of someone doing you a favor, "Don't worry about the insurance stuff, Daniel. I handle it. You just take care of everything else. You just take care of everything else." I had taken care of everything else. For 7 years, I had taken care of everything else. The reimbursements, I said slowly. She handled the insurance. I don't know what. Mr. Cartwright. Dr. Hale's voice was careful, deliberate. I am not an investigator. It is not my place to speculate about specifics. What I can tell you is that in cases like this, financial fraud is not uncommon, and when it is present, it is typically significant. He paused. This is why I said what I said. About the police. I stood up. Not dramatically. Not in the movie way where a man rises with purpose and direction. I stood up the way a person stands when their body needs to move, because remaining stationary has become physically impossible. I walked 6 steps down the corridor. Stopped. Turned around. Walked back. Dr. Hale watched me without moving. I sat back down. "She's my wife?" I said. "Yes," he said. "We've been married for 8 years." "Yes. I love her." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know, Mr. Cartwright. I can see that clearly. If I call the police," I said, "what happens to her?" "She'll be evaluated. Psychiatrically and criminally. She could go to prison." "That is possible, yes. And if I don't call, then she will likely continue," he said. "The pattern doesn't stop on its own. It escalates." And eventually he stopped. "Eventually what?" He held my gaze. "Eventually the doses stop being careful," he said, "and the damage becomes permanent. Or worse." The corridor was very quiet. "She could die," I said. "She could die," he confirmed. "Or cause damage that cannot be reversed. Mr. Cartwright, whatever her reasons, whatever the psychology beneath this, your wife is also in danger. Calling the police is not an act of punishment. It is an act of intervention. For her as much as for you. I call my brother first. His name is Thomas Cartwright, 54 years old, ex-Army, currently running an auto shop in Franklin. The kind of man who does not panic and does not offer false comfort, and who, when I called him at 7:49 a.m. and said, 'Tommy, I need you to come to the hospital,' asked exactly 2 questions. 'Are you hurt? And what's the address?' He arrived in 31 minutes. He sat in the corridor chair where Dr. Hale had sat, and I told him everything. Not haltingly, not in pieces, completely, from the beginning, because Thomas was the kind of person who needed the full picture before he could be useful, and who would be useful if given it. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The insurance cabinet in the spare bedroom." "Yes," I said. "You need to look in that cabinet, Daniel." "I know. Before the police do. I know." He put his hand on my shoulder, briefly, firmly, the way men in my family communicated the things that didn't fit in sentences, and then he took out his own phone. "I'm going to call Bobby Tillman," he said. Bobby Tillman was a detective with the Williamson County Sheriff's Office who had gone to high school with Thomas. "Not officially. Not yet. Just, I want him in the conversation before this becomes official. So you're not standing in this alone when it does." I nodded. Thomas made the call. And I sat in that corridor in my coat from the night before, surrounded by the beige walls and the fluorescent hum and the indifferent monitor down the hall, and I thought about a woman in an ivory dress crying at an altar, and I genuinely tried, to find the place in the story where I had missed it, where the floor had been hollow beneath the surface the whole time. They let me see her at 8:30 a.m. She was in bed, for in her arm, the monitors doing their work around her. She looked tired. The specific, drained tired of someone who has been through a physical crisis, who has been poked and tested and stabilized through the night. Her dark hair was loose against the pillow. Her face, without the careful composure of her waking hours, was softer and younger and more vulnerable than it usually appeared. She looked at me when I came in, and she smiled. The full-face smile. The present, whole attention smile that had stopped me cold in Clover Falls 8 years ago. The smile that said, "You are the most important thing in my immediate environment." "Daniel," she said, "you stayed all night." "I stayed all night," I confirmed. I sat in the chair beside her bed. The chair I had sat in so many times that I had a permanent mental imprint of it. The slight give of the seat, the angle of the armrests, the particular view it offered of the window and the parking lot beyond. She reached for my hand. I looked at her hand reaching for mine, and I thought about Dr. Hale's words. She will likely continue. The pattern doesn't stop on its own. I thought about my mother saying, "That woman is good, Daniel. You hold on to her." I thought about the cabinet in the spare bedroom. I thought about 7 years. And I took her hand. Not because I had decided anything yet. Not because I had found a way through the wreckage of what the last 90 minutes had constructed in the corridor outside. But because her hand was reaching for mine and I was, at the marrow level, at the level below thought and decision and even betrayal, a man who held on. I held her hand, and I looked at the woman I had built 7 years around, and I thought, I don't know who you are. And then, beneath that, quieter and more devastating, I don't think you know either. I need to ask you something right now, and I need you to be honest. Could you hold that hand? After everything Daniel just learned, could you sit in that chair and hold that hand? Or would you have walked out of that room? Drop a comment. Tell me what you would do. Because what Daniel does next is going to surprise you, and I need to know you're with me before we get there. Thomas drove me home at noon. Laura had been moved to a monitored room on the 3rd floor. The attending physician had recommended a 72-hour observation period, which Dr. Hale had noted in the chart with a clinical neutrality that I now understood was doing two things simultaneously: keeping Laura safely contained and preserving the integrity of whatever came next. He had been careful about that. Careful in a way that told me he had been in this territory before, or near enough to it that he knew how the ground behaved. I sat in Thomas's truck, a 2019 F-150, immaculate the way everything Thomas owned was immaculate, a holdover from Army discipline that had never fully released its grip, and watched Clover Falls move past the window. Main Street with the hardware store, the Baptist church, the elementary school where my mother had taught for 30 years, where the same hopscotch squares had been painted on the blacktop since I was 6 years old, faded now, but still traceable. I had grown up in this town. I had believed, with the uncomplicated certainty of a man who has never had serious reason to doubt his own judgment, that I understood the world I lived in. The truck moved through it, and I looked at it, and I felt like a man looking at a photograph of a place he used to live. "You don't have to go in today," Thomas said. "The cabinet will still be there tomorrow." "I know," I said. "I need to go in today." He nodded. Didn't argue. That was Thomas. The house on Maple Creek Drive was a house I had built. Not literally. I had not built this specific structure, though I had worked on the addition in 2019, the sunroom off the back that Laura had wanted and that I had framed and drywalled over a long summer weekend. The two of us working alongside each other, her handing me tools, both of us sunburned and laughing by Sunday evening. But I had built the life inside it. Every room contained decisions I had made, labor I had performed, years of my particular brand of steady, unglamorous devotion. I stood in the front doorway for a moment. The house smelled like itself, the particular combination of Laura's candles and old wood, and the faint underlayer of the kitchen, of every meal cooked in it. It smelled like home. It smelled like 8 years. I went upstairs. The spare bedroom had been Laura's office for most of our marriage, a pleasant, organized room with a desk by the window and bookshelves that held a mixture of medical billing texts and the literary novels she read voraciously, dog-earing pages and underlining passages with the engagement of someone who took stories seriously. The filing cabinet was a standard 4-drawer unit, gray metal, positioned against the wall beside the closet. It had a small lock, the simple push-button kind that came standard with the unit, not a serious lock, not a lock chosen to keep someone out, but the kind of lock that signals only this is organized, this is mine. I had never opened it. 8 years. I had never had reason to. I stood in front of it and I looked at it, and I thought about all the times I had been in this room, bringing her tea, sitting on the edge of the desk chair while she worked, reading in the armchair by the window on Sunday afternoons while she was at her computer, and I thought about how completely invisible a secret can be when you are not looking for it. The lock was not locked. I pulled the top drawer open. I am going to tell you what I found in that cabinet the way I found it. Not in the organized, retrospective way of a man who has had time to construct a narrative, but in the raw, sequential way of a man opening drawer after drawer in a spare bedroom in the early afternoon while his brother stood in the doorway and said nothing. First drawer, standard files. Insurance policies. Ours, the car, the house. Tax documents going back 6 years. Utility records. A folder labeled medical. Active that contained the current treatment documentation, organized with the same impressive precision she brought to her symptom journal. I set these aside. Second drawer, older files. Previous year's tax returns. Documents from her life before Clover Falls. Memphis records. The paperwork trail of the previous marriage and its dissolution. A folder labeled medical. Historical containing the records from her earliest episodes. The first Clover Falls regional admission, the subsequent referrals. I set these aside. Third drawer. This is where the neat, logical order of the first 2 drawers ended. The third drawer contained a folder with no label. I opened it. Inside were insurance claim documents. Not the standard copies a policyholder keeps for their own records. Something different. Something that took me a moment to recognize and then, when I did, sat in my hands with a weight entirely disproportionate to the weight of paper. They were duplicate submissions. I am not an insurance expert. I am a contractor. But I know enough about paperwork and documentation from years of running a business to recognize, when I laid those documents side by side on the desk in that spare bedroom, what I was looking at. The same medical services billed twice. To different insurance providers. Our primary insurance, Blue Cross, through my old contractor's policy, which I had maintained throughout the years of reduced work at considerable expense because Laura needed continuous coverage, and a secondary policy I had not known existed. A policy in Laura's name only, taken out 3 months before her first episode. I stood at the desk and I laid the documents side by side, and I looked at them for a long time. Thomas had come fully into the room. He stood beside me, looked at what I was looking at. "Daniel," he said. "I see it," I said. "That's fraud," he said. "Not as a judgment. As information. As the plain naming of a thing." "I know what it is," I said. I kept looking. There was more. A separate folder, behind the first, contained bank statements for an account I had never seen. A savings account at a bank in Nashville. Not our bank. Not the joint account we used for household expenses. An entirely separate account in Laura's name into which, over the course of 7 years, a sum of money had been deposited in increments that were clearly calibrated to avoid scrutiny. I added the figures in my head. I added them again because the first sum seemed impossible. I added them a third time. $214,000. I sat down in the desk chair. The chair Laura sat in every day. The chair from which she had managed the cabinet, managed the claims, managed 7 years of a system so carefully constructed that 7 doctors and 1 devoted husband had moved through it without ever finding the seam. $214,000. And my savings account drained. And my business dismantled. And my 12 employees let go. And my truck sold. And my house refinanced. And my Thursday nights surrendered. And 7 years. 7 years. Thomas called Bobby Tillman at 2:15 p.m. Bobby arrived at 3 o'clock in plain clothes, which was a consideration I noticed and was grateful for. He was a solid, unhurried man in his late 40s with the manner of someone who had seen enough of human complexity to have stopped organizing it into simple categories. He looked at the documents I had laid out on the desk. He asked careful, specific questions. He took photographs of the key documents with his phone. Then he sat down across from me in the armchair by the window, and he said, "Daniel, I need to ask you some things, and I need you to understand that I am asking them as a friend of your brother's first and a detective second." Okay, I said. "Did you have any knowledge of the secondary insurance policy?" "No." "Any knowledge of the Nashville account?" "No." "Did you participate in any of the claims submissions?" "No." She handled everything. She had the background in medical billing. I had no reason to. I stopped. "No, I didn't know." Bobby nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said. "And for what it's worth, this is not an uncommon dynamic in these cases. The partner is almost always the last to know. The whole architecture depends on them not knowing." "The whole architecture," I repeated. "The illness gives her centrality," Bobby said. "Your devotion gives her cover. Your financial contribution funds the account. I'm sorry to put it this way, Daniel, it's a system. You were a component in a system you didn't know you were in." I looked at him. "My devotion gave her cover," I said. "Yes." "She used my love for her as part of the mechanism." He held my gaze. "Yes," he said. Thomas made coffee. The 3 of us sat in the kitchen, my kitchen, with the tile I had relayed in 2020 during a good week of Laura's, both of us on our knees pressing grout and laughing about something I could no longer remember, and Bobby walked me through what happened next. There would be a formal investigation. Given that Laura was currently hospitalized under medical observation, the process could move in a coordinated way. The hospital's psychiatric team, the insurance fraud investigators, the county sheriff's office. Bobby would make the calls that connected those pieces. I would need to provide the documents, answer questions formally, speak to a lawyer before I spoke to anyone else officially. "What happens to her?" I asked again. The same question I had asked Dr. Hale in the corridor. "That depends on a lot of things," Bobby said. "The psychiatric evaluation is going to be important. If she's found to have a genuine psychological disorder, which, from what you're describing, seems likely, that factors into everything. Prosecution, sentencing, treatment options. She could still go to prison." "She could," he said. "The fraud is significant. 200,000 plus is federal territory, potentially." "But she's sick," I said. Bobby looked at me carefully. "She is," he said. "Just not in the way you thought." After Bobby left, Thomas stayed. He cooked dinner. The simple, competent cooking of a man who has fed himself for decades without fuss. Pasta, Jared sauce, garlic bread from the freezer. He put a plate in front of me and sat across from me and didn't say anything about eating it and didn't say anything about not eating it. I ate half of it. Then I said, "Tommy, do you think she ever loved me?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said carefully, "that whatever Laura is, whatever is happening inside her that made her capable of this, I think you were real to her. I think what she took from you was real. But I also think that love, the way you mean it, the way Mama and Daddy meant it, I don't know if she's ever been able to do that. I don't know if she knows how." "That's not an answer," I said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." We sat with that. Outside, the November dark had come down fully over Clover Falls, the particular dark of small-town November, thick and early, pressing against the kitchen windows. The house was very quiet. The house that smelled like candles and old wood and 8 years. "I keep thinking about the altar," I said. "What about it?" She cried. "Real tears, Tommy. I've been thinking about it all day. Were those real?" Thomas looked at his plate, then at me. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe in that moment, in that specific moment, they were the realest thing she had. Maybe she was crying because she knew what she was and she was grieving it." I had not considered that. I turned it over. A woman at an altar in an ivory dress, crying real tears, not for joy, but for the self she couldn't be. Grieving, in the moment of the vow, the very capacity the vow required. It did not make what she had done smaller, but it made her, in some complicated and terrible way, more human. And that was almost worse, because it meant that somewhere in the architecture of the deception, there had been something genuine, something real that she had built the false structure around, like a ruin at the center of a manufactured landscape. I called a lawyer that evening, a woman named Catherine Briggs in Franklin, recommended by Bobby as someone who handled cases with both criminal and civil dimensions and who would, Bobby said, tell you the truth even when it isn't what you want to hear, which is exactly what you need right now. Catherine Briggs answered her cell phone at 7 p.m., which told me something about her. I gave her the outline in 10 minutes. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Cartwright, first thing, you are not in legal jeopardy here. What I'm hearing describes a victim, not a co-conspirator. We need to formalize that quickly and clearly, but I don't want you losing sleep over that angle." "I'm not losing sleep over that angle," I said. "What are you losing sleep over?" I looked at the kitchen, at the tile I had relayed on my knees. "She's still my wife," I said. "She's in a hospital bed, and she's going to wake up tomorrow, and at some point someone is going to tell her that I know. And I keep thinking about her face when that happens." A pause on the other end. "Mr. Cartwright," Catherine Briggs said, "in 20 years of practicing law, I have learned one thing above all others about cases like this. The legal process and the human process run on completely different tracks and at completely different speeds. You can handle one without having resolved the other. You don't have to know what you feel about your wife in order to cooperate with an investigation. Those are separate tasks. And when they intersect?" I asked. "They always intersect eventually," she said. "But not today. Today you cooperate, you protect yourself legally, and you let the system do what the system does. The other thing, what you do with what you feel, that's for later. That's for when you have more information and more ground under your feet." "More ground under my feet," I said. "Yes." I thought about the foundation work, about how you test ground before you build on it, about how some ground, no matter how solid it appears, has water moving beneath it that you can't see until you start digging. "Okay," I said. "What do I do first?" She told me. I wrote it down. And then I sat at my kitchen table alone, in the house I had built a life inside of, and I did what I had not allowed myself to do since 7:15 a.m. in the hospital corridor. I let myself feel it. All of it. The 7 years of early mornings and hospital chairs and insurance paperwork I never opened. The employees I let go. The truck. The savings. The Thursday nights. The refinanced house. The second row at a wedding I hadn't even had because there was no wedding with a second row. There was just an altar and an ivory dress and real tears and a woman who had, from some broken, unreachable place inside herself, constructed the most elaborate and costly expression of need I had ever encountered. I sat at my kitchen table and I felt all of it. And somewhere beneath the betrayal and the loss and the devastation of a truth that had rearranged every year I thought I understood, somewhere beneath all of that was grief. Not anger. Not yet. Grief. The grief of a man who had loved someone completely and was now being asked to understand that the someone he had loved was both more and less than who he thought she was. More broken, more human, more desperately, unreachably in need of something that love alone, even his particular brand of it, the steady, get up and do it kind, could not have provided. Less dishonest than sick, less villain than wounded. He sat with that grief. And outside, the November dark pressed against the windows of Clover Falls. And the house was quiet. And in the morning, everything would begin. We are at the deepest, most broken point of this story. Daniel is sitting in the wreckage of 8 years, and he is feeling grief instead of rage. And I need to know if you understand why. Drop a comment right now. Tell me, is Daniel weak for grieving instead of raging? Or is he the strongest kind of man there is? Comment below, because what he does next depends entirely on what kind of man he chooses to be. And I promise you, the ending of this story is going to change the way you think about love. I did not sleep. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way of a man pacing floors and staring at ceilings. I lay in the bed, our bed, on my side of it, and I was still, and I was quiet, and my eyes were open, and the hours moved past me the way hours move when the mind has too much to hold and sleep cannot find purchase in it. At 5 a.m. I got up, showered, dressed, made coffee I barely tasted, sat at the kitchen table with Catherine Briggs's notes in front of me and read them 3 times without absorbing them. Watched the November light come up slowly over Clover Falls, gray and thin and honest, the kind of light that shows you everything without the mercy of shadow. Thomas had offered to come. I told him I needed to do this alone. He understood. That was Thomas. He always understood which things needed witnesses and which things needed privacy, and he had the discipline not to impose himself on the latter out of love. I drove to Clover Falls Regional at 7:30 a.m., parked in the same spot I had parked in for 7 years of these mornings. Sat in the car. The 3rd floor was quiet at that hour, the particular quiet of a hospital morning, when the night shift is winding down and the day has not yet fully assembled itself. I knew the nurses on this floor by name. Margaret at the station near the elevator. Dennis who worked the far corridor. They nodded at me the way they always nodded, with the gentle, slightly weighted recognition they reserved for the long-term family members, the ones who had become fixtures in the institutional landscape of chronic illness. I nodded back, and I walked to Laura's room. She was awake, sitting up slightly in the bed, the morning light from the window laying across the white blanket, her dark hair pulled back now, her hands folded in her lap. The monitors continued their work around her. The 4 was still in her arm. She looked at me when I came through the door, and I saw it. In the first half second, before her face assembled itself into the expression she intended to present, I saw something move through her eyes. Something that was not the warm, present, full-face welcome I had seen every time I walked into a hospital room for 7 years. Something that knew. It was there, and then it was gone. Replaced smoothly, almost instantaneously, with the smile, the warmth, the full attention. But I had seen it, and she saw me see it. And in that half second, the last wall came down. I sat in the chair beside her bed. The chair. My chair. I did not take her hand. She noticed. We sat in the silence for a moment, the particular silence of 2 people who have arrived at the same threshold from different directions and are standing on opposite sides of it. Then I said, I know, Laura. 2 words. The same economy she had used on me for years. The careful, precise deployment of language to produce maximum effect with minimum exposure. She was still for a long moment. Then, very quietly, how much? Everything, I said. The secondary policy. The Nashville account. The substances. Dr. Hale. The documents in the cabinet. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had changed in her face, something I had never seen there before. The architecture of performance, which I now understood had been present in every expression she had ever directed at me, had gone. What was underneath it was rawer and younger and more frightened than anything I had seen in 8 years of sitting beside her bed. Daniel, she said. Don't, I said. Not harshly. Please don't start with my name. Please don't. I know all your entry points. I know how you begin things. I need you to just say what's true. For once. Just what's true. A long silence. I don't know how to do that, she said. And the terrible thing, the thing that cracked the last intact piece of something in my chest, was that I believed her. She talked for 40 minutes. Not smoothly. not with the organized, impressive precision of the symptom journal or the insurance files. Haltingly, backtracking, stopping and starting, the way people talk when they are excavating something they have never brought to the surface before. She told me about her childhood in Memphis, a mother who was chronically ill, genuinely, devastatingly ill, who had received in her illness the complete, organizing attention of everyone around her. A household arranged around sickness, love expressed through caregiving, attention given to suffering and withheld from health. She told me about learning, early and wordlessly, that need was the language that got answered. She told me about the first marriage, to a man named Gary who had been attentive in the beginning and absent by the end, whose absence she had tried to reverse with the only language she knew. She told me that when she met me, when she met a man who was constitutionally, fundamentally, at the marrow level a man who stayed, she had felt something she could only describe as recognition, as finding the architecture that fit the need. I didn't plan it, she said. Not in the beginning. The first episode, I was frightened of losing you. We had been married 14 months and I could feel you. You were present, you were devoted, but you had your work and your life, and I kept thinking, what happens when he doesn't need to take care of me? What happens when I'm just ordinary? She stopped. So you made yourself sick, I said. I made myself need you, she said, which felt like the same thing. I looked at this woman, my wife. In the morning light, stripped of every layer of the architecture she had constructed, she looked exactly like what Dr. Hale had said she was. Not a villain, not a predator, not the character that the word fraud conjures. A person so profoundly broken in the specific place where self-worth lives that she had spent her entire adult life constructing elaborate structures to compensate for the absence of it. A person who did not believe she was lovable without being needed, who did not believe she could be chosen without being required, who had taken the steadiest, most devoted love she had ever encountered and weaponized it, not from cruelty, but from a terror so deep and so old it had preceded me by decades. I sat with that, and then I said the thing I had decided, somewhere in the sleepless night, that I needed to say. Laura, what you did, the fraud, the money, the 7 years, that has consequences. Legal ones. I can't protect you from that, and I won't try. Bobby Tillman has the documents. Catherine Briggs is my lawyer. The process is already moving. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. But I need you to hear something else, I said. I need you to hear it clearly, and I need you to understand I mean it. She looked at me. I am not going to let you go through what comes next without someone in your corner, I said. Not because what you did was acceptable. It wasn't. Not because I'm not. I am furious, Laura. I am devastated in ways I don't have language for yet. But because whatever is broken in you that made this possible, that needed doing long before you met me. And you are going to get the help you should have had 30 years ago. I am going to make sure of that. Not as your husband right now. I don't know what I am right now. But as a human being who spent 8 years loving you and still believes that somewhere in there, something was real. The tears came down her face. Not the decorative kind. The real ones. Like the altar. Was any of it real? I asked. I need to know. Was any of it real? She pressed her hands against her face. And then she said, into her palms, muffled and broken and more honest than anything she had said in 8 years. You were always real to me, Daniel. That was the only real thing I had. Before we reach the ending, I need you to drop a comment right now. Should Daniel stay or go? Is love enough to rebuild from this? Tell me what you think Daniel should do. Comment below, and then read the final act, because the answer might surprise you. The legal process moved the way legal processes move. Steadily, impersonally, with the grinding, institutional momentum of a system that does not pause for the human complexity living inside the cases it processes. Catherine Briggs was exactly what Bobby Tillman had promised, direct, precise, and constitutionally allergic to false comfort. She walked me through every stage with the clarity of someone who understood that what her clients needed most was not reassurance, but orientation. A map of the terrain. Somewhere solid to put their feet. Laura was formally charged in December. Insurance fraud. 2 counts. Federal jurisdiction, given the amounts involved. The psychiatric evaluation, ordered by the court and conducted by a forensic psychologist named Dr. Amara Rhodes from Vanderbilt, produced a report that was, Catherine told me, among the most thorough she had seen. Factitious disorder. Compulsive deception rooted in early childhood attachment trauma. A psychological profile that was, Dr. Rhodes wrote in her summary, entirely consistent with a person who had never developed the internal architecture to believe she was worthy of love in its ordinary, unearned form. The report mattered. The judge, a measured woman named Judge Patricia Holloway in the Federal District Court in Nashville, read it carefully. Sentenced Laura to 3 years probation, mandatory psychiatric treatment, full restitution of the fraudulently obtained funds, and 150 hours of community service. No prison. I sat in that courtroom and I watched Laura stand before Judge Holloway, and I watched her face when the sentence was delivered. The specific, overwhelming relief of a person who had been bracing for the worst and received instead something that felt, against all reasonable expectation, like a door left open rather than one slammed shut. She turned briefly and found my face in the courtroom. I held her gaze. I did not smile, but I did not look away. The restitution came from the Nashville account. $214,000, returned to the insurance companies through a structured agreement Catherine negotiated. What remained? A smaller amount, the residue after legal fees and restitution, Laura offered to me directly, through Catherine, without condition or negotiation. I used it to rehire 2 of my former employees, Michael Daines, who had been with me for 9 years before I let him go, and a young man named Curtis Webb who had come to me straight out of trade school and who had, in the years since, been working for a larger contractor in Brentwood, and who came back to Cartwright Construction with the quiet dignity of a man returning to where he belonged. We started small. A kitchen renovation in Clover Falls. A garage addition in Spring Hill. The phone rang because my name still meant what it had always meant. Solid, reliable, the kind of work that doesn't announce itself but holds. I was building again. It felt like breathing after a long time of forgetting to. Laura moved into a small apartment on Wilson Pike in Brentwood, close enough to her court-mandated therapist, a woman named Dr. Susan Gallagher, who specialized in attachment disorders and who Laura saw twice weekly with a consistency that was, her probation officer noted, exemplary. We were separated, not divorced. Separated, which is a different thing, a more honest thing, a word that acknowledges distance without yet declaring permanence. I want to be truthful about this period because I think the truth of it matters more than a cleaner narrative would. It was not linear. There were weeks when I was certain that what Laura had done had cauterized something in me permanently, that the love I had carried for 8 years had been so thoroughly reorganized by the truth of those cabinet documents that what remained was not love, but its archaeological remnant, the shape of a thing without the thing itself. There were other weeks when I drove past the yellow house on Sycamore Lane where I had first seen her, the house she had long since vacated, now occupied by a young couple with a toddler and a tire swing, and felt something that was unambiguously grief. The grief of a man who has lost something real, regardless of the circumstances of the losing. Thomas said, "You don't have to decide anything yet." My mother said, "Daniel James, that woman needs prayer and professional help, and you have made sure she is both. Now you need to make sure you have both too." She was right about that. I started seeing a therapist in Franklin, a man named Dr. Robert Osei who had kind eyes and an unhurried manner and who said, in our 3rd session, something that I wrote down and have returned to many times since. The question is not whether you were deceived. You were. The question is not whether your love was used against you. It was. The question, the only question that matters going forward, is what you believe love is for. Is it a transaction that requires honest dealing to remain valid? Or is it a commitment to a person that survives the revelation of how broken they are? Neither answer is wrong, but you need to know which one is yours. I sat with that question for 4 months. In April, 5 months after the hospital corridor, 5 months after the cabinet, 5 months after the courtroom, Laura called me. Not a lawyer's call, not a procedural call. Her voice, on my phone, on a Tuesday evening in April when the Tennessee spring had arrived with its particular insistence, pushing green through every available surface with the unstoppable optimism of a season that does not negotiate. "Daniel," she said, "I don't have an agenda for this call. I'm not asking for anything. Dr. Gallagher says I need to practice saying true things to people I've harmed. And you're the person I've harmed most. So I'm calling to say, I'm sorry. Not because it helps me legally or because it changes anything that happened. Just because it's true and you deserve to hear it said plainly, without architecture. I was sitting on my front porch on Maple Creek Drive. The evening was warm and soft, and the street was quiet in the Clover Falls way. A dog barking 2 houses down, a kid on a bicycle, the distant sound of someone's lawnmower finishing its last pass. "I hear you," I said. "That's all I needed," she said. A pause. "How are you doing?" I asked. A longer pause. Surprised. "Better," she said. Slowly. "But better." "Good," I said. "That's good, Laura." We stayed on the phone for a few more seconds, not talking, just present in the connection, in the shared air of a call between 2 people who have survived something together, even if the surviving looked different for each of them. Then she said goodnight. I said goodnight. I sat on the porch a while longer, and I thought about Dr. Osei's question. What do I believe love is for? I drove to Brentwood on a Saturday in June. Laura opened the apartment door in jeans and a simple blue shirt, her hair down, no performance in her face, just her face, the real one, the one I had glimpsed in the hospital room when the last wall came down. She looked different, not recovered. Recovery is not a destination but a direction, but oriented. Moving in the right direction with the deliberate steadiness of someone who has chosen, consciously and daily, to keep moving. She looked at me with something that was not the full face, manufactured presence of before. It was quieter than that, more uncertain, more real. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "I know," I said. I didn't want to give either of us time to prepare anything. She stepped back from the door. I came inside. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the case. Not about the documents or the account or the fraud. About Memphis. About her mother. About the household arranged around sickness and the child who learned that need was the only reliable language. About Gary and his withdrawal and the things she had tried to reverse with the only vocabulary she possessed. About the 14 months before the first episode, the good months, the real ones, the chicken and dumplings and the Sunday afternoons, and the things she had felt when she met me that she had called recognition. I told her about my 4 months of therapy. About Dr. Osei's question. She listened. When I finished, she said, "What's your answer?" To the question. I looked at her. "I think love is a commitment to a person that survives the revelation of how broken they are," I said. "I think that's what I was raised to believe, and I think it's what I actually believe, even now, even after everything. But I also think," I paused, "I think that commitment requires truth to rebuild on. I can't go back to what we were. That house burned down. But I'm not sure that means there's nothing left to build." She was very still. "I don't know how to be loved without being needed," she said. "I'm learning. Dr. Gallagher says it's the central work. But I'm not there yet." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to be there yet. I'm asking if you're willing to do the work." "Every day," she said. "I choose it every day." "Then that's enough," I said. "For today, that's enough." We did not move back in together that day, or that month, or even that year. What we did was begin, slowly, honestly, with the deliberate care of 2 people who understand that the ground beneath them has been tested and found to have water moving through it, and who are choosing to build anyway, this time with full knowledge of what's underneath, with proper footings, with nothing hidden in the walls. Laura continued her therapy. Twice a week became once a week became the ongoing maintenance of a person committed to understanding herself. I continued mine. Cartwright Construction grew back incrementally. Michael and Curtis and 2 new hires by the following spring, the phone ringing with the steady reliability of a reputation that had survived an interruption and returned to itself. My mother had Laura to Sunday dinner in September. She pulled me into the kitchen afterward. The same kitchen, the same motion, the same timing as years before, and she said, "She's different, Daniel." "Yes," I said. "Quieter," my mother said. "More real." "Yes." My mother looked at me for a long moment with the clear, unhurried assessment of a woman who has been reading her son's face for 51 years. "You're going to be all right," she said. "Both of you." "I think so," I said. "We're building carefully." She nodded. "That's all you can do," she said. "Build carefully. And don't hide anything in the walls." 1 year after the hospital corridor. 1 year after the fluorescent hum and the beige walls and 4 words that rewrote everything. I stood on the front porch of the house on Maple Creek Drive on a November evening. The same month, the same quality of dark, the same Clover Falls quiet pressing in from all sides. And I thought about what Dr. Hale had said. Calling the police is not an act of punishment. It is an act of intervention. For her as much as for you. He had been right. The intervention had been brutal and necessary and had cost both of us things that could not be fully recovered. But it had also stopped something that would, unchecked, have eventually consumed her. The careful doses that were no longer careful. The damage that could not be reversed. Calling the police had saved her life. And in doing so, in the long, non-linear, honest, difficult way, had made it possible for something real to begin. Not the same thing. Something new. Something built on actual ground. Laura's car pulled into the driveway. She got out with the easy, unperformed movement of someone arriving somewhere familiar. Came up the porch steps. Sat in the chair beside mine. We looked at the street together. The November dark. The distant dog. The kid on the bicycle long since called in for the night. After a while she said, "How was your day?" "Good," I said. Curtis finished the Henderson's edition. "Came out well." "I know," she said. He texted me a picture. "It looks beautiful." I looked at her. She looked back. Not the full-face manufactured presence. Just her face. The real one. "You hungry?" I asked. "Starving," she said. I stood up. Held out my hand. She looked at it for a moment, and I watched something move through her eyes. Something that was not performance and not architecture and not the language of need. Just a woman deciding, again, today, to choose the real thing. She took my hand. We went inside. This story is for everyone who has ever loved someone through their brokenness and discovered that the most courageous thing love can do is not look away, but demand the truth. If this story moved you, if it made you think about someone in your life, if it changed something in the way you understand devotion, please leave a comment below. Tell us what this story meant to you. Say what you're feeling. You don't have to have the perfect words. Just say something true. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about love that survives, truth that heals, and people who choose each other again after everything, subscribe and tell us in the comments what story you want to hear next. We'll be here, building carefully, nothing hidden in the walls. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.